So what was that experience like for you? So I imagine when you're entering a French kitchen, how much experience would you say you would have had prior to going into that circumstance?
Making dinner with my buddy.
Fair enough. Okay. So that, I imagine that's a pretty steep learning curve. What was that like for you?
Well, I mean, to get my foot in the door, I came up with this idea because I went and met with him, and he was working while I spoke with him, and I told him my goal was to work and learn how to cook, and he said he would call me, which I got the feeling he wasn't going to call me. So I went home that night, and I came up with this idea. So the next morning, I knocked on Chef Alon's back kitchen door, and he came out in his chef's jacket with his hat, and I said, Chef, I tell you what, I can give you Wednesdays and Saturdays from 8 in the morning till noon every week for free. So I could give him 8 hours of work for free. And I told him I'd wash his dishes, clean lettuce, mop floor, whatever. And I didn't think he'd say no. And of course he didn't say no. And that got me my foot in the door. Part of it was like, all right, initially I'm working for free, right?
Sure.
Now, he's still got really strict standards because this is his restaurant and he's got everything on the line. And Alon was probably in his 30s at that point, and he had an incredible resume, and he was super intense, and he was one of the top restaurants, one of the top restaurants in Richmond. So even though I was coming in for free, he couldn't,
Yep.
But some things happened in my course of time there, and eventually I found myself working full time, making, golly, man, I think I was making, I want to say I was making $3 an hour. I can't remember, but it wasn't much. And then I found myself, the sous chef went to open up his own restaurant. So rather than Chef Alon hiring somebody, he just, I did 8 weeks one time at 100 hours a week. Oh, that's what it was. I don't remember what my hourly rate was, but when I got to this position, he paid me $300 a week. And so I was working 100 hours a week. It was $3 an hour.
Sure. You did the math on that. Yeah.
But I also did, I think 8 months. I did 8 weeks at 100 hours a week, and I did 8 months at 88 hours a week. And anyways, so there was I remember one time I'd played that role for about 7 months. And one day I went home from work and I realized Chef Alon didn't yell at me today. And it was the first time in 7 months that he hadn't yelled at me. So I was digging in. I was trying to get to the level I needed to. But that's, I mean, I don't know if I'm sharing with that.
What were you during that process? So there was some, and Shane and I talked about this a little bit about, just the culture of kitchens and how that's changed quite a bit, and the way that things were taught and how those things have changed. And I want to talk about your own teaching a little bit later, but was that the moment for you when you realized that maybe there wasn't a reprimand that day, that you felt, when did you feel like, hey, this is a career. This is something I want to be doing.
I mean, the day I went home and realized that he hadn't yelled at me, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Sure. Now that sense of accomplishment's draped in being exhausted and tired. When we finally got to 88 hours a week, it was because I finally got Sundays off, because he closed on Sundays and I could wash my clothes and get a little sleep. But I think it was when he came to me and promoted me to sous chef and then offered me a partnership in his restaurant that all of a sudden I thought that my political science degree that I was going for with no idea.
Those are pretty definitive signs that you might be on the right track. There's
I don't know if I was on the right track or not, but I certainly at that point was like, okay, I enjoy this. I like it. I'm getting better at it. And while I never thought that this might be a way to put a roof over my head, I'm going to give it a go.
And what was your transition then from that level of cooking to where you are now? And I'm not saying this is a short path, but what was the switch for you to want to getting into more live fire cooking and more barbecue?
So if we just kind of fast forward a little bit,
well, I guess, is there any moment in there that you were like, hey, I kind of want to try something different?
Yeah, but it's 87. It's about 7 years later.
Fine. Okay. Right.
So I work with Chef Alon. We accomplish a lot. I take on a tremendous amount of responsibility. My skills get much better. I eventually meet my wife, Leslie, who is in the food industry. We got married. We moved to Florida. We come back from Florida. I'm working in restaurants, and I come up with this idea to open up an off-premise catering company in Richmond, where I live. Mm-hmm. The goal is to bring fine dining to off-premise catering. I have this idea that I think if I come to your house and cook you excellent food, give you great service, charge you a reasonable price, and leave your kitchen cleaner than when I got to your house, mm-hmm. maybe we'll stay in business. So Sharper Palate opened in November of 1993. Next month, we'll have been in business for 32 years. So fast forward to that, down the road, around 2004, we've grown the company to where we have about 50 full-time employees and over 100 part-time employees. And I'm not cooking anymore. I'm just managing. Mm-hmm. I'm helping run the business.
Right.
And as a chef, as a cook, I'm missing that.
What are you missing? Could you identify specifically what you're missing?
I'm missing making food. I'm missing being at a cutting board. I'm missing being at a stove. I'm missing sauteing and browning and braising and roasting and making desserts. And I mean, at that point,
the craft.
Yeah, the craft. At that point in my career, I kind of say all the times I can make all these hard to pronounce fancy foods. And here I was not doing that anymore. And so as a chef, I wanted a new culinary activity. And for whatever reason, I wanted to learn how to cook with fire. And more specifically, I wanted to learn how to cook barbecue. And actually, I'm in the back. This is my barbecue shed where I'm talking to you right now. And to my right is my house where this all started at. And on the other side of this house is Sue Brown's house, which I'll tell you about. And anyways, I bought a barbecue pit. I got some hickory. I had gotten a couple of cookbooks I read that really stuck with me. John Willingham, who's no longer with us. One of his book that he wrote, he said, anyways, I'm fast forward. I get this pit, I get some hickory, I get some pork butts, I make a rub from scratch, I season these pork butts, I light the fire, I put the meat on the smoker, and I ruin this big old load of meat.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm surprised in the best of ways. I'm surprised. You know, I could make all this hard food. I could make all this fancy stuff. Barbecue is it's a casual food. Nobody's intimidated. I've never met anybody that was afraid to pronounce barbecue.
Sure.
There's a lot of French dishes where, you know, they look at that menu and they I'll have that. Point.
Yeah.
And so here I was, and I just ruined tens of pounds of this pork shoulder, and I'm just like, I'm surprised. You know, maybe part of you said to me last week, why? I think I've always been curious.
Sure.
I've always been curious. I've always been, when I was a young boy, I always gravitated towards mentors and probably asked too many questions. And so here I am with barbecue all of a sudden, and I ruin it. And I'm a little bit befuddled. I'm a little surprised. And it's same. I'm intrigued. It's like, wow. But so going back to these books, so one of the books I read was John Willingham, and to paraphrase what he says, but in this book, John says, "Smoke is dirt. We're cooking. We're not smoking." And the reason I didn't know a lot of this then, but I know it really clearly today, and this is a big part of what I teach. But it wasn't good. Most people, when we make barbecue for the first time, we undercook it and we oversmoke it. And barbecue at its best level is trying to coax something really great out of a tough cut of meat. So my initial attempts at barbecue, it was tough. I didn't know how to run a clean fire. And anyways, my neighbor on the other side of the house to my right is Miss Brown, and Miss Brown's been my neighbor for 25 years this past July. And this is happening about 2004. And so I'm making this barbecue, and I knock on Miss Brown's door, and I say, "Miss Brown, I have some barbecue for you." And she's very gracious, and she's
Sure.
like so thankful. And she takes this barbecue, and she's just so happy. And I keep bringing her barbecue over, every next batch. And I don't know how many times I had done that, but one day I knock on Miss Brown's door. Miss Brown opens the door, and I said, "Miss Brown, I got some barbecue for you." And she looked at me. She said, "Tuffy, I still have some of the last barbecue you gave me." And I looked at her face, and I knew right then and there she didn't want it.
Right.
And it was because it was oversmoked and it was tough. So I just kept digging in, and I kept thinking about John Willingham's words. And I'm probably going too far down the path, but I started to learn how to run a clean fire. It got better.
Well, what? There's, I feel like there's a lot of real estate between that last batch of Miss Brown and it got better. What was the thing that was a switch for you? That I understand the clean fire, but when did you?
Well, I think John Willingham's words were like the words that set me down the path. I started watching the fire so intently at the firebox. I really started paying attention to, and I started watching the stack. If smoke is dirt and I've got smoke coming out of the stack of my smoker, then dirt's coming out of my pit and dirt's going all over the meat. So I started really playing with the fire. I think there's a pyro in many of us. I think there's a lot of people like to play with fire. But all that being said, I started manipulating the logs and airflow and playing around with different things that could like take a smoky fire to a clean fire. And that really was a number of years in process. The way I teach a fire today and some of the things that I do, it's so like I can take you there, and I can take you there in 15 minutes. What took me years to kind of sort out. I know exactly what to do now to get a fire to do what I want it to do. That's going to make good barbecue. It needs to generate heat. At the level that I want it to. But it's got to breathe. The fire's got to breathe. And I didn't know this until I started playing around with the fire. And so the size of the wood that I use, I mean, you can't see it, but on the other side of this computer, just outside, I have what's called a kindling cracker. And I use logs now that are about 9 inches long, and I cut them down pretty small. And I use a chimney full of charcoal to build the base of that fire, and then I use sticks and do it log cabin style. So I'm really I can get there quick now. But it took a lot of bad barbecue. It took a lot of staring at the fire and a lot of time at the back end of my pit at the firebox to get better with that. And you know, but I think it goes back to a little bit of my Thomas Keller, who's a really great chef.
Sure.
In his first cookbook, I think it's his first cookbook, The French Laundry, Thomas Keller says he says about chefs deriving deep pleasure from doing the monotonous and the mundane. And, you know, that's always, my personality has always kind of enjoyed that repetitive process and trying to figure out nuance and to get better. I mean, running always I could always just dig in as a runner. I could always push out the pain and run faster and longer if I needed to. And I guess a lot of it's mental, but I applied it was just my personality just to be able to study that fire, watch that fire, and get better at it, and get better at it with in a way that was repeatable.
Yep.
Just to be able to do it every time.